In the 5th grade, I decided to sing in my school talent show. As I walked on stage, I clenched my fist. My stomach turned, and I felt tension linger throughout my whole body. I sang, but not for long, before I choked up and began to cry. In this moment, all the courage and confidence that I had built up to perform shattered. I felt myself fall apart as I attempted to continue this song. My whole body, my mind, my aggressive and anxious thoughts overcame my body before I could even process the reality. This is what my anxiety makes me feel like. These moments of aggressive, suffocating, oppressive thoughts that clutter my mind make me and have led me to the darkest moments of my dejection. These feelings make you want to run away. These feelings make you want to hide. But the reality is that the longer you hide and the further you run, the harder it is for you to learn how to confront these issues that I allowed to control my life. As a freshman in high school, I had been at a prestigious school for 2 years and constantly surrounded by athletes, actors, singers, dancers, and kids that I essentially thought did everything I did, but better. That year, my grade doubled in size. I was with twice the amount of kids, and I felt twice the amount of pressure on myself. Later that year, a girl passed away by suicide. I didn't know her. I had never met her. But what I did know of her was that she was extremely intelligent and talented. But I wondered if she knew that, if she would have believed me. After this, in a 50-minute period, the school showed all grades a video informing kids on how to detect signs of suicide. We had a short discussion with the teacher and peers, and were handed us a card for a suicide hotline. And then we left, continued with our days, continued with our years. But one thing stuck with me. We talked about what it was to commit suicide. Commit. A word used to reference a crime, a murder, horrible and aggressive actions that had choices behind them. But in my experiences, the feelings that came with wanting to end it all stemmed from having no choices, from feeling as if you're drowning, feeling as if you are drowning and you can't see the shore, and you don't know how to call for help because you've simply forgotten how to scream. You're suffocating, pushing, clawing at the water, trying to get to the surface, but feeling as if you'll never get there. I've felt that desperation. I've felt alone, and these thoughts would torment me my freshman year. I thought, but these thoughts weren't because I wanted to do something wrong. They weren't because I wanted to hurt somebody. They were because I felt as if there was no other option. I wanted people to understand that, to understand me, to understand her and her actions, but I thought they never would. So once again, I didn't say anything, and I let that stigma control me, control my happiness. That year, I shut myself out from everyone and did not allow myself to acknowledge what I was feeling. Work became more burdensome, social interactions became harder, and I was becoming a person I couldn't even recognize. I would get only a few hours of sleep during the week, working until late into the night to ensure that all my assignments were done to absolute perfection. I would come to school the next day so exhausted, so caffeinated, that I was a shell of a person I once was. Striving to be this person, this perfect person that had nothing wrong with them, I was pushing away. I was isolating myself from the resources that could have helped me because I simply felt too embarrassed to ask. By the end of that year, I pushed myself. I had so many anxious thoughts that constantly were there, pushing me towards dejection and pushing me towards becoming a person I hated. I hated myself. I hated my inability to be as good as an actor, dancer, singer, athlete as everyone else, and I had successfully convinced myself I was worthless. I constantly had angry and aggressive and violent thoughts towards myself racing through my mind. I felt so alone, so isolated, so hopeless that nothing would ever get better. I knew what it was to feel like that girl who died by suicide. I knew what it was to feel alone. And I was about to break until that Memorial Day weekend. As I drove to Maine with my sister, she asked me how I was doing, how I had been feeling, knowing that I had been distancing myself from my family for a while now. My sister's always been someone I trusted, someone I could tell everything to. And when she asked me this, I felt as if she sincerely wanted to know. She genuinely cared. So I shared a little. And then eventually everything I had been feeling for the past few months, for these past few years, for my whole life came out. I was so overwhelmed, and in that moment, I realized that what I was feeling wasn't typical. That those moments of suffocation, of pure anxiety that gnawed at me from the inside out were not what I should be feeling, were not what a girl my age should be feeling. And after this conversation, I understood that I needed to reach out to those resources that could give me the help I needed. After the worst times of my freshman year, I decided I needed to implement a support system into my life. I reached out to my favorite teacher, someone whom I also trusted so much. She was the first teacher that had not simply told me I needed to manage my anxiety. I needed to learn how to be confident. She understood that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing and that I didn't know how to call for help. She understood that letting myself suffer was only worsening my situation. She was someone I could talk to. She was someone that inspired me, encouraged me to create these connections I needed in order to better myself and my mental state. And little by little, I did. I made these connections. I talked to my teachers, and I stopped isolating myself, and instead entrusted friends with these thoughts and these feelings that cluttered my mind and hindered my ability to do anything to my fullest potential. I started making these connections. I found help medically, therapeutically, and I got better. Each day that goes by, I get better. And it wasn't immediate. And I still have thoughts that linger in my mind. But the reality is, I know I'm not worthless. I know I'm not hopeless. I'm a person, and I'm starting to love myself. And that's more than I could ever say, than ever I could have said 2 years ago. This made me realize that I needed to reach out. I needed to do everything I could to make myself better. I aspire to have all people who feel like this currently or have felt like this to understand that there are places, there are people, there is everything they need to get better. They can get better. They can do it. Remember when I told you about my 5th grade talent show? I went up on stage and I sang, but I cried. But after this, what I didn't tell you was that my music teacher made me turn around, both figuratively and literally, to sing with my back turned to the crowd. And I did. I started singing again with the belief of one single individual. And eventually, I turned all the way around. The crowd stood, applauded, made me feel supported. And it wasn't my best performance, but I did it. With the support of one individual, I continued and eventually had a whole group of people behind me, supporting me, and not making me feel abnormal for feeling this way, but understanding that the only important thing was that I continued. I didn't give up because they didn't give up on me. I turned to face them then, and I turn to face you now, asking you to be part of the solution, asking you to have my back the way that my teacher did, the way that that crowd did, and to have the back of every individual who feels alone. We need education. We need more than a 50-minute block after a tragedy. We need to learn how to know when someone is suffering and where to go when you yourself are suffering. If we want to reduce the stigma around mental health, if we want to reduce the stigma around getting help, we need to live in a world that stops trying to fix things after they happen. 44,000 people die each year by suicide in the US. It's the 10th leading cause of death and the second leading cause of death from 10 to 18-year-olds. In this past year, there's been 7 deaths by suicide in prestigious high schools around me. 7. And for me, that's too many. I could have been one of those 7, too afraid to ask and too concentrated on being perfect. So what do? How do you help? Know the warning signs. I've told you so many of them. Irritability, social isolation, feelings of hopelessness, not getting any sleep, lack of concentration. And with knowing these signs, you need to ask if people are okay. It's this common misconception that if you ask somebody if they're suicidal, then it will put this idea into their head. You won't do this. More often than not, when you ask somebody if they're okay, when you ask someone if they're suicidal, you're met with a sigh of relief. I was met with a sigh of relief when my sister asked me if I was okay, because I felt like she genuinely cared. She genuinely wanted to know. Check in with the people who aren't doing okay and check in with the strong ones who pretend that they are. Be like my sister. Be like my teacher. Be like my family, like that crowd, like everybody. So you can help these people. If you listen, if you do simply what these people did for me, you can help people like that girl who died by suicide. You can help those 44,000 people that die each year, and you can help people like me, the girl standing in front of you right now. No one should be afraid of fighting this stigma. No one should be afraid of fighting suicide. Me talking to you today is what our collective voice could sound like, what our collective voice should sound like. It sounds like bravery. It sounds like strength and persistence, and it consists of all the qualities we need to fight suicide. Suicide is everyone's business, and I'm asking you to save a life. Thank you.